Welcome to our listeners who are tuning into the DeWinter Difference, an audio podcast where I spend a bit of time with incredible people I've known for years and you get to listen in. I hope that our conversations are unique, insightful, short enough to hold your attention, but long enough so that you get some great takeaways that you can apply in your own career, life, and relationships. Today, I am very pleased to speak with my friend Jessica Aguirre. Many of you will immediately recognize the name, and given what she does for a living, you can pair that visual with this audio. Jessica is an Emmy-award-winning news anchor for NBC Bay Area News. She's a rock star in every sense of the expression, has interviewed Olympic athletes, luminaries, presidents, and many more. As a journalist, she's researched and reported on countless injustices, and as a person, she's witty, funny, genuine, and will pull no punches. Jessica, thanks for taking the time in your very busy schedule to chat.
Oh my gosh, what a nice introduction. Thank you, Derek. Of course, I sent out alerts across all platforms yesterday that no matter what happened, if you called me, I was supposed to be ripped off the set and come over exactly that I would take your call at any moment. And I told Joe and, Mexican President Andres Manuel Obrador today, like, I cannot go to this summit with you people because I am going with Derek instead. Super Derek. So I'm sorry. I could have helped with those relations, but no, I'm here with you. Don't worry.
The world suffers because of your decisions.
I'm putting you first. You are my
Thank you.
priority. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, let's start by doing something fun. We're going to go back into the way back time machine.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I know. You're 10 years old. Walk into the
Oh,
kitchen and tell anyone who can listen or hear you that one day I'm going to be an Emmy award winning news anchor. I doubt
huh.
this happened, but a little tiny part of me thinks that you actually could have done that in the real world. Tell us a little bit about how the journey began for you to get from there to here.
Wow. Okay,
I
so
know,
I
big one.
true admission is I did do a little newscast when I was a kid. That is true. We used to play newscaster all the time. But, for us, we were like my parents are immigrants to this country. They learned to watch, they learned to speak English watching TV. So the TV, I mean, if I think back to my earliest memories with the TV being on, my mother smoking a cigarette. Those that's exactly how we lived in our house, right? The TV was always on. And my parents always had the news on. So it was something that kind of was always an undercurrent in the background. And in fact, I mean, I know this sounds weird. I actually remember watching the Watergate hearings. I used to sit in front of our black and white TV and watch Watergate. And my mom was always like, my mom has a very cute, heavy accent. She'd always be like, "You're a very strange child, very strange." So we were always watching news, very much into. But you know what? I really thought I was going to be a dancer. I love dancing. I grew up dancing, taking ballet and all these kind of things. And that bubble burst though, I was always a prolific reader and didn't happen, and I went to college, the first person in my family to go to college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and again, one night watching TV with my mom, we're watching the news, and, my mom looks we're having this whole discussion about what am I gonna do with my life, and my mom looks at the TV and sees an anchor woman on TV, and she literally says to me, "You should do that. You should be talking like that lady on TV. You're very nosy. You talk a lot." And she goes, "And you're in everybody's business all the time." And she was right. It's like the perfect job for me, right? I'm always asking questions. I'm always having fun. And that's kind of what happened. I changed my path at the University of Miami, started working at a television station when I was a junior, and have never left the newsroom ever, ever,
Wow.
ever, ever.
Is that one of those first times where you could see what you can be type of moments? Like
You
with your
know,
mom? Like,
I think it was a little bit of that, but also the truth is there weren't any people like me on TV. There was one Latina anchor woman in Miami. At that point, we lived in Miami where it's, 98% Hispanic. And she was like this trailblazer. And I was like, really? You think I could do that? But that really kind of set the path. And then that became, for me, what I loved about it right off the bat, working in a newsroom was I loved the adrenaline of it. And I love seeing things for myself. I'm a little bit mistrustful, and unless I see it myself and I don't understand it myself, I can't really wrap my head around it. So I loved, especially in those days. I mean, we're talking, late 80s, early 90s when networks had huge budgets and they didn't really have, the level of uh, j- correspondence set everywhere. So at the TV stations that I worked for, I mean, they would put you on a plane for anything that happened any place in the country. And I loved that living out of a suitcase in my car.
that's awesome. there getting to the place that you are, there are challenges too numerous to mention, but can you think of a couple or one that's like, "Boy, this coulda derailed me, but it didn't." Like some big seminal moment that
I think the
yeah.
big thing was, like, first of all, there weren't any women. There weren't a lot of women like me on television, and I didn't really I wanted to be a reporter, but I didn't look like a reporter. I looked a lot like the lady in Flashdance. So no, it's true. I had like I was wearing leggings are back, but I wore them back then. I have super curly hair, and I just didn't have the right look. And believe it or not, it was one of the other anchor woman at the station that said you need to look like the job you want. And right now, you look like a stripper. You need to get your look together, and I went and I spent all my money at Ann Taylor. I remember that, came back with this beautiful suit that cost me my entire salary, and that kind of changed how I saw myself, what the
Mhm,
possibilities were for myself. So that was a big thing. And then, the constraints of actually living in a very Latino upbringing. I was a reporter, like covering world events, living with my parents. So my parents would often call me. I remember this clearly. I was covering one of the Miami riots, and my parents called me on the phone in the middle of a riot to tell me that my dad's coming to get me because it's unsafe where I am. So they were routinely planning to come pick me up places. So it was a lot of that, and to be honest, there was also there weren't a lot of Hispanics on English language TV. I first
mhm,
started off in Spanish language TV, and I was one of the first reporters in Miami to make the crossover and appear on English language TV. I went to the University of Miami. I mean, Spanish is my first language, but I went through the education system in English. And I got a lot of pushback at the beginning about, "Do you understand English? Do you speak English?" And I was always perplexed because I was like, "Are we not speaking English in this
mhm,
moment?" There was a lot of that kind of undercurrent of whether you are really qualified to do this job based on you being a young woman, because I was young and, pretty, and based on the fact that there weren't integrating Hispanics on TV. I mean, now you go to Miami and like every single television anchor in Miami, regardless of whether you're on English language TV or is probably of some sort of Hispanic origin, just because the market is so predominantly Hispanic.
mhm.
And that's a
Yeah.
lot of what used to happen, especially in the old days. You would get plugged into markets depending on what the demographics
Mhm.
of the market is. Like I wanted to go work in Boston. I thought that would be fun. And they were like, yeah, they don't have Hispanics in Boston. And I was like, there's not one? There's not one Hispanic in Boston. You've got to be kidding me.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, let's stay in this time machine. Fast forward a few years. You're 22. You graduate from the U.
Yeah.
Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, take on the world. How would the present day you talk to her about the strides that will be made in the next 20 to 30 years for women in the
Oh,
workplace specifically?
wow.
Like, and kind of like a part two is like, do you think she'd be excited, surprised, maybe a little bit disappointed that more didn't happen, or a
You
whole
know,
mix of those things?
I think when you're in it, you don't even realize that the changes are happening because, you're so, especially as a young woman, I was so focused on the success portion of my journey, right? I had to be a reporter. I had to eventually be an anchor woman. I had this, I'm one of those bull in the china shop people. I put my head down and I just forge forward. That I didn't realize in the moment that I was at a place in history where so much rapidly was going to change for women in the workforce, especially women in the newsroom, which is the only work that I really know, right? When you first start off in television, they put you in a car, you're a reporter. I'm in a car with probably a man that's 20 to 30 years older than me, a seasoned photographer, and we spend 14, 15 hours in a car together. And it was a different time. I mean, my cameraman would be leering at women. We'd do an interview, he'd get off and he'd be like, God, I really would. And you're like, nope, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me. But it was also just a different environment and way in the way things that would have happened back then, the way they talk to you just wouldn't fly right now. So you you know, it just was a different time. I mean, I
Mhm,
remember And, and then later on, I am a main anchor woman, and both of my children, when they were born, I had 6 weeks off maternity leave for both kids. 6 weeks. I was back on the set on a whoopee cushion. 6 weeks later. And now women get the opportunity to have 6 months later, to be off and spend time with their family. There's much more respect for the family. We didn't have that in the newsroom in the old days. I think it's we've made these great strides, and in the old newsrooms, it was primarily men. Now in my newsroom, my general manager is a woman. My news director is a woman. Most of my executive producer is a woman, and the woman who heads NBC O&O division is a woman that I've worked for now for, gosh, 25 years. So things have definitely changed.
Mhm.
And I also think, though, that we've lost a little bit of that when you put people, and I think these guardrails are phenomenal, but when you put too many guardrails on people, you lose, a little bit of spontaneity, you
Yep.
know?
I hear you.
So I feel like that's a loss. Mhm.
Yeah. So you and we only met, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember our very first conversation. In fact, I remember exactly where I was sitting because I was up in San Francisco at our offices, and it was cloudy or foggy outside, and I was in a corner, and I just was so excited to have a conversation with you because we were talking about becoming a board member with a women's organization that I was already on the board of, and we dove into some pretty serious conversations like right off the bat about ethnicity and cultural biases, and you were super curious about my upbringing and how it was kind of had some unique parallels to yours, and I always enjoy talking about that stuff. I think it's fascinating a topic to have conversations about. So on that note, and I brought this up to you a little bit ago when we tried to do one of these before, is like I'm super curious as to your thoughts on the Latin experience in Florida versus
Mhm.
the Latin experience in California.
And it's interesting because I lived in Los Angeles till I was 8 years old, and this was in the '70s, and I remember as a kid, my mom used to always say to us, my sister and I, before we left the house, we were in a mode that we were trying to really assimilate, and so we spoke Spanish at home, and my mom would always say to us, "Okay, we're gonna go outside." She'd say it in her accent, "We're gonna go outside, so don't speak in Spanish. We don't want them to know that we're not Americans." And, my sister and I was always look at her really puzzled, like, "Okay, well, you don't speak, we'll speak because you are obviously not from this country." And it was such a culture shock when we moved to Miami because in Miami, the Latino population had kind of inculcated itself in such a way that it really took over. I mean, I lived in a neighborhood in Miami that was 100% Hispanic. In fact, there were people in my neighborhood that never learned English. It was very, very, very Hispanic, and being Hispanic was very important. And so it was a culture shock for me. We spoke Spanish everywhere. We did everything. It was Spanglish. To this day I still speak Spanglish to my sister and my mom. But it was very much a different culture. It was very much that you were Hispanic. And then when I moved back to Los Angeles many years later after I was working at KABC in Los Angeles, when I came back, it was a complete culture shock again because I went back to a community, which I think has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. But when this happened, this was in the mid 90s, where people didn't speak Spanish in the middle of a newsroom, or I would start talking to people in Spanish and they'd be like, I don't speak Spanish. Because again, it was that cultural assimilation that needed to happen in 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 California. And so it was really interesting to me, but I also see that that's changed dramatically because you actually see a lot of younger kids of a younger generation now that want to speak Spanish again and want to have kind of a connection with their heritage, which before you didn't have it. Now you go to Miami and you go to what my mother calls Walgreens, which is really Walgreens. And when you go to Walgreens, it always stuns me when I go visit my family because I'll go in and I'll say, "Oh, do you guys have toothpaste?" And people will look at me like I'm speaking a completely different language because they don't speak no one speaks to you in English there. It's weird.
And is there a is there a logical why between the two places? Is it because most immigrants to California that are Latin or Mexican versus a larger Cuban immigrant population to Florida? Or
Yeah, I think it's the numbers of it have something to do with it, but I also think that when you had of this mass influx of Cubans all at the same time. And when those Cubans came over in the early 1960s, when Castro took over Cuba, the first wave of Cubans that left Miami were usually the affluent Cubans that were able to get out. And I think there was just such a sense of, this whole diaspora, right? Like, so we're coming here and we're going to all bond together and we are going to, we have to remake our lives. And if we're going to recreate a little bit of where we used to live. And that first wave of Cubans that came over highly educated, and they just kind of decided it was kind of, I feel like they're the 49ers. Like they put their stake in the ground and they were like, this is ours and this is what we're doing. And
Huh,
that just
interesting.
kind of, you know, continued where you have more waves of Cuban and then it just became, over the years you've had different, migrations come over from Cuba and they really just kind of set up shop. It was
Hmm,
a fascinating, way to grow up. My high
interesting.
school was literally 98% Cuban.
Huh,
Not just now, yeah, you have such a range of Hispanics in Miami, Venezuelans, Colombians, Nicaraguans, but when I was growing up there, it was 98% Cuban, my high school.
interesting. So, as you've grown and developed in your career, have you adjusted your interviewing style in any particular meaningful way? That naturally would depend on who you're interviewing and for what purpose. But on the whole, do you think you've made some significant changes in your approach to conversations with people?
I think that's well, one, I think it's experience, but two, I also think you kind of develop your own way of being present in an interview, right? So I always do research. I love doing research. I love knowing, depending on who it is, there's just so many different kinds. Are you doing a profile on someone? Like with Carrie, when I was doing that profile that you helped facilitate. So I'll read everything that I can find about her, right? But then in an interview like that, I don't bring questions. I like to have a conversation with a person. So for me, those interviews are really about listening because you want it to be like you're just having a conversation with a friend, and when you have a conversation with a friend, you're all over the place, right? You'll talk about this and you'll talk about this, but really listening for me, I love listening, is in those moments that you get those really good starlight moments when you just
Yeah.
listen to something someone says. The other thing I was gonna say, if I'm doing a super technical interview, though, where I'm doing a official or something where we're really talking about issues, I will bring notes. But again, I feel like the biggest thing I've learned as an interviewer is really to hear people's words, not to be thinking about what my next question is going to be, but to just completely be focused on what they're saying. And then I may not even ask the next 6 questions I had. I may go down another avenue with them because people always reveal important things about themselves if you're actually listening.
Absolutely true. I wholeheartedly agree. So you have done thousands of interviews. Here's a few questions for you. The
Okay.
interview that you had that you were most scared about doing before it happened. Like you were set up to meet with XYZ person, you were like, "Oh my God, I am gonna
Mm.
absolutely lose myself here."
That's really hard. I always say, I have, like, Newsheimers. There isn't enough data space in the brain. I will often say, something to someone like, "Oh, yeah, I remember that," and other people will be like, "Yeah, because you interviewed that person." I'd be like, "I did? I have no idea." I think the interviews I get most nervous about are actually have been interviews, not even with, like, someone who's important, like a president or anything like that. I think the interviews that have made me the most nervous have been when I've been doing breaking news, live coverage, where people are dependent on me giving them the right information for safety purposes. So I will say, if I'm giving information, like when the Napa fires are raging and I'm trying to tell people which direction they're supposed to go or what's going to happen next, or during the Asiana plane crash when we really didn't know when something was happening, those are the things that really jar my memory in terms of me being not nervous on TV, but very cognizant that I have a responsibility not to endanger someone. And those are the
Gotcha.
things that make me nervous. Yeah.
What about the most fascinating person you've ever met? Good or bad, by the way?
Fascinating. I feel like the most fascinating people I've ever met, and this is gonna sound weird, are I really love interviewing people that have done something really, really heinous because I really love trying to understand What is it? What is the trait? Where do you lose yourself in that sense? And I love stories of redemption where
Mm,
somebody like and I can't even remember some of them, but, like, just I just did this Race in America episode, again, because I have no long-term memory. I just did this Race in America interview the other day where I profiled 3 prisoners that spent time in San Quentin for life, that they were there for life, and they did manage to get out after 40 something years, and to hear them discuss who they were as gang members that shot people and killed people to who they are now and the path of how they got to that place and to talk to them to see if they and to make, I always I am the Barbara Walters of my newsroom. My producer is like, "You made a guy doing life cry." And I was like, "Yeah, because you're just really interesting to figure out what is your culpability and do you still carry that with you, you know?" It's just I love
interesting.
hearing ordinary people tell me something either really heinous about themselves that they've made peace with or something really ordinary that turns out to be extraordinary.
That's awesome. All right, so let's see. The Mary Tyler Moore Show,
I love Mary Tyler Moore. Love
Anchorman,
it. Oh
Anchorman,
God.
or and the Morning Show.
Ugh.
What do you think most resembles your newsroom today?
Well, definitely not
Other than the morning
Anchorman.
show is the morning show is obviously more current, so that's
You
the
know,
more
I
likely answer, I
really
suppose. But
I really liked Aaron Sorkin's The Newsroom. Do you remember that
hmm
one?
yep,
I thought that one was a very verbose version of The Newsroom because I think that really depicted the ethical questions that we have all the time, the level of kind of discourse that we're involved in all the time, the over the top personalities. It does tend to attract a bunch of weirdos,
hmm
myself included. But I have to say, I resisted watching the newsroom for a really long time because I was like, I never like television shows that are about television people. They never really resemble who we are. And then finally, one of my producers that's worked with me for over 20 years, because people kept asking me, have you watched The Newsroom? And I kept saying, "No, I'm not gonna watch it." And then she came up and said, "I think you need to watch it because they're trying to tell you that you're just like the Jennifer Aniston and she may have followed you around." And what I loved about her character is that kind of there is this undercurrent of tenacity that we all
hmm
have, and that tenacity kind of butts you up against a bunch of other people all the time, you know? I think that one and The Newsroom from the one, that I think was on HBO, those are the 2 that most really captured if it wasn't the details of the news, it was the fact that journalists I mean, we're not like this we're not this, there's not this, worldwide club where we get on every morning, and in this mass call to kind of move the needle in one direction. I mean, it's all individuals that maybe we make mistakes and there are mistakes that are made, but you get into this business because you really love the business of news. You love telling a story. You love finding out information. I mean, are there gonna be outliers? Of course, in every business, but there's this especially those of us that stay in for a really long time, like me, I've been doing this for, gosh, 40 years now. You know, I don't have to do all these extra things that I do all the time, all these extra specials, but I'll have a producer, my Christine will call me and this is how we ended up doing this, San Quentin special on the rehabilitation of San Quentin. All she said to me was, "Are you interested in San Quentin?" I'm like, "I'm in. When are we doing
Oh,
it? What
jeez.
are we doing it?" We have a shorthand that if you ask me a question, "Do you want?" They don't even have to get through the sentence. I'm like, "Yep." And I still have that drive, and there's a lot of people in my newsroom that are like that, you know? And then there are
That's a,
young people that get in the newsroom that can't take the intensity or the pace, which is hard on the people that in your family though, right? I've
sure,
missed birthday
absolutely.
parties, I've missed everything.
hmm
Um, but I always tell my girls, I hope one day you'll find something that you really would be happy. You're always sad when you disappoint people, but as I said to my kids before, I'm upset that I left you on your birthday, but the minute I get in that car and I'm driving toward that shooting or whatever, the truth is I forget it, and I
Yeah.
am 100% into what I'm doing, and I want my kids to have that too.
hmm All right, so we get to turn the tables. I'm all done
Okay.
with you. You get to ask me a
Mm.
question. I don't know what it
Okay.
is. This is unscripted, as is most of what just happened anyway. But you can ask me something that I will try to answer without embarrassing myself.
Oh god, then that's really gonna be hard for
That's
you.
gonna be tough.
Okay, so you and I have talked a lot about your upbringing. Like, it's a little you were in Hawaii. I mean, I think what people don't really know about you, I mean, you're just super successful businessman, but, you're really quirky. I mean, quirky is the word
In a
I
nice
would
way?
use.
In a nice way?
No, quirky in a fantastic way. And you
Okay.
have a spontaneity about you and a quick wit and a humor that I mean, people that do money type things, usually I call them money type things because I don't understand them, don't have. I could have seen you as doing all these like a surfer or, all these, you're very artistic, you have all this creative stuff with you. And I also think you are if you give a mouse a cookie. Remember the book If You Give a Mouse a
Mhm.
Cookie?
Oh, yeah.
Where you give a mouse a topic, the little mouse starts doing something, and then before you know it, the mouse is deeper, deeper, deeper into it, and then the mouse is doing something else, and then the mouse has gone another direction because the mouse has such curiosity. So I always think of you that way. And I guess my question to you is twofold. One, where how is it that you were in business and didn't lose that because I feel to me like business is very constricted, it's kind of
Mhm.
boxy. And yet you're always outside the lines. How is it that you've managed to keep yourself outside the lines in a world with what you do that constantly would like you to be more boxed in?
Boy, well, I don't do exactly what you do, but we also have some unique parallels where my job is about connecting with people, whether it's internally or externally. Like every day is a little bit different. Every person that I meet is a little bit different. And if you take the time and energy to really listen, to give people the opportunity to share themselves with you. I think part of doing a great interview is making sure that they're the highlight, that they get to share something of themselves, which makes them feel really good or important, meaningful, whatever it might be. And so I have been doing this for 30 years, and every day is a new opportunity to kind of connect and maybe scratch that artistic itch or that quirky itch or that, spontaneous itch because every conversation's different. And I
Yeah,
tend and I tend to walk into these things relatively unscripted as well because it's kind of more fun. Like it's
right.
more interesting to be surprised when someone shares something as opposed to you thinking I better make sure that I ask question number 6 and you miss entirely the gem that was just given to you.
Do you see
Uh,
yourself as kind of like a matchmaker almost?
I think there's a big component of that. You can compare recruiting to lots of different things, whether it's being like real estate, which is also matchmaking a little bit, a house and a home and without it and a in person. But I do think of it like that because ultimately, I mean, you match people into the job, but it's the match of people that makes things great. And so I think I'm relatively intuitive as it relates to that
Yeah.
because of all the different places and people and languages and houses and schools that I've been to. Like I've had to, develop an intuitiveness, or I probably would have not been successful. And I don't mean from a business perspective, but from a life perspective. Like I lived in a lot of different places, moved around a lot, went to a lot of different schools, spoke different languages, and ended up here. And I think that's all been very developmental and applicable to what I do today.
Right,
So,
sure, that's probably the key for you being able to across so many different areas and talk to people and be able to see different vantage points. But I also think something you said is really important is, you know, matching a person to a job or a career is almost it's your career or where you work for many people that you stay there for 10, 15 years. Listen, it lasts more than some marriages, right? So you
mhm.
want to make sure that you're in a situation where you can really, you know, develop and yet have this bond. I have one more question for you, Derek.
Yes.
If you were, would you prefer the fur coat in Ken in the Barbie movie? You know how Ken has the fur coat and he's wearing the leather pants? Or do
Hmm.
you think you would sport the Macklemore fur coat better?
Well, I dressed up as Ken in the fur coat for Halloween.
I
So there,
heard that. Ding,
there's
ding,
your
ding,
answer.
ding, 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 ding.
There, I got the answer. And in fact, I threatened to wear that to go see my
Today?
kids. Well, now,
Oh,
well,
no.
thank you for,
Are you
because I
wearing
just,
it now?
I, no.
Oh,
He
okay.
said, no, I should have. So it could be one of those like, I'm great, I'm awesome, I'm Ken, I'm wearing the
No.
fur coat. No, I
Uh-huh.
actually wore it, and I think I pulled it off pretty well. And my wife is 5'8" blonde, so she played the Barbie part pretty well too.
Oh my god, that is
I
perfect. You
know.
guys are Barbie and Ken. That's
I know
wonderful.
exactly. Well, look,
Mhm.
you have been overly generous with your time. I know how busy you are. In fact, actually, I don't know how busy you are because you're insanely busy, and I couldn't comprehend it. So I really appreciate this, and I love seeing you on the news. I love the role model that you are for both men and women. I think you are an incredible role model to your daughters. They're lucky to have you, and we are very lucky to have had this conversation today.
Thank you
So
so much for inviting me. This is
it
so fun. Thank you.
it means a lot to me. So look, you go do your news thing, and I will hope to see you real soon.
Yeah, I would like to see the photo of you as Ken.
I'll send you one for sure.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
take care.
Thank you. All
Bye.
right, bye-bye.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the DeWinter Difference podcast. If you like this episode, head to dewintergroup.com/dewinter-difference to catch future episodes and share your thoughts, comments, or suggestions. And make sure to connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. This podcast is produced by the DeWinter Group, the leading recruiting firm in the Bay Area and beyond. We help top companies and people reach their fullest potential through world-class accounting, finance, and technology recruiting services.